so that people listening later can hear it. So I'm going to share my screen with you. And let's see what I want to share. All right, so can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. Okay, so we are going to start with literacy. And we started yesterday with the new content, right? And so we read 2 passages and then found the similarities and differences between them. So we're going to continue doing that today. And our essential question that we're focusing on is, what is the relationship between living and or non-living things in an ecosystem? So we're going to be, throughout the next week, we're going to be learning about living and non-living things, and then you'll have a performance task just like normal. So today we're going to read 2 texts called Marjory Stoneman Douglas and Rachel Carson, and we're going to use the you do to find the similarities and differences in the text, just like we did yesterday. All right. Kevin!
Cameron.
Oh, Cameron Sow! Hi, everyone!
It was Martin.
Oh, it makes me so happy that you're here. Okay, well, I'm going to mute everyone else, but I love you guys and I'm glad you're here, so keep listening, okay? All right, so we are going to be reading the 2 texts, Marjory Stoneman Douglas and Rachel Carson, and then use the you do to find similarities and differences between the texts. Provide a statement that integrates information from both texts. Okay, so as we, let me figure out how to get out of here. Let me out. Okay, so as we read yesterday on your Google Classroom assignment, you have the 2 copies of the text, and then you have the copy of UDO G4 U2 L2. So I want you to make sure that you have that pulled up and this one. And then I also want you to make sure that you have your 2 texts pulled up. Are there any questions about that? If you have a question, chat me. Okay. All right, so you want to make sure that you have those pulled up, and then we are going to get started. So I'm going to start by reading the text Marjory Stoneman Douglas, and as we're reading, we're going to notice that these texts are kind of long, right? This one is about 4 pages, and that's going to give us a lot of information. And that doesn't mean that we need to write down all of this information. We want to look for the most important parts from this text, okay? Because I feel like it can get a little bit overwhelming trying to write out all of the important parts. But we really want to focus in on what was her major achievement, why is she famous, why are we reading about her today? So I'm going to read through this text, and as I am reading, I want you in your you do to be typing some of the things that you think are important, okay? And then we'll go back through and kind of go through the things that we thought was important. But again, as I'm reading, I want you to think about what is the most important. Why are we reading about her? What was her major achievement? Cool? All right, so Marjory Stoneman Douglas. Marjory was born in Minneapolis on April 7th, 1890. Most of her childhood was spent with her mother's family in Massachusetts. Marjory spent lots of time in libraries where she loved discovering things in books. She read everything she could get her hands on. She didn't know it then, but she was acquiring the research skills that would be useful to her when she became a writer. So I'm going to pause right there and ask myself, okay, what's super important right now? So I think probably the most important thing was that she spent a lot of time in libraries where she loved discovering things in books, right? And then at the end it says she was acquiring research skills that would be useful when she was a writer. All right, so now we're going to continue. In 1908, Marjory started at Wesley College. She was very happy to be with other young women who were just as interested in books as she was. In her senior year, she was an editor of the college yearbook. She was chosen to be class orator because she was so good at giving speeches. After graduating in 1912, Marjorie didn't know what to do next. At that time, women were not encouraged to have careers. Marjorie didn't think she could be successful as a writer, so she took a job in a department store in Newark, New Jersey. She taught basic skills in grammar and math sales to clerks. Okay, so at that time, women were not encouraged to have careers. That's probably something important and maybe something that will change for her down the road, right? Because she went to college and, expected to have a career. And at that time, that just wasn't in the cards for most women. Paragraph 3. She was married to Kenneth Douglas for less than 2 years. When her marriage ended in 1915, she moved to Miami, Florida, where her father lived. Douglas's father, Frank Stoneman, was editor-in-chief in the Miami Herald. Okay, the Miami Herald is a newspaper. So for him to be editor-in-chief, that means he made a lot of the major decisions about what was put in the newspaper, the way things were written. He hired his daughter to write in the paper's society column. So that's another thing that's important. Douglas was thrilled to be writing. She said she had discovered what she was meant to do. Her father also shared with Douglas his passion for preserving Miami's older neighborhoods and the area to the city's west called the Everglades. So they had this shared passion for Miami and the Everglades. After joining the Red Cross during World War I, she found that the city's population had quadrupled. The city needed to expand. Much of the land near Miami was part of the Everglades. However, most developers didn't think about the native animals such as the alligators, egrets, and plants such as mangroves and sawgrass that were already living there. The developers dug canals to drain the wetlands. In 1924, she quit the newspaper and concentrated on writing short stories, which she sold to magazines. However, she never forgot the social issues that were important to her. For instance, her story Plumes told how the fashion for feathers on ladies' hats led to killing Everglades birds such as the egret. Okay, so far we know that Marjorie, from the beginning, loved spending times in books, and then she eventually went to college. But after she graduated, women were not encouraged to have careers. And then she was hired to write for her father's paper, which is a huge deal at that time. And she developed this passion for the Everglades, an area that is near Miami. Oops. Although some of her stories were starting up the top left. Although some of her stories won awards, Douglas wasn't able to sell her work and sometimes found it hard to earn a living. Then in 1941, her friend, Hervey Allen, asked if she would be interested in writing a book about the Miami River. Hervey Allen was editing a series of books about rivers. Douglas didn't think the Miami River was important enough to be part of the series. She suggested writing a book about the Everglades instead, and Allen agreed to publish the book. So that's a huge turn of events for her, right? So she's starting to write this book about the Everglades, and then someone agreed to publish it. Douglas got right to work. Her skills as a reporter were useful when she interviewed people to learn more about the region. She intended to cover a range of topics from the history of Seminoles to Native Americans who lived in the Everglades to make the place unique. She was speaking with a hydrologist when she came up with a phrase that changed the way many people thought about the Everglades. She said that she saw the Everglades not as a stagnant swamp, but as a glistening river of grass. The Everglades River of Grass was published in 1947. Douglas was 57 years old. So that's important too, that we're on the second page of the article, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas.
Okay.
Okay, cool. All right. Oh, there's so many people on here. I'm so glad you guys are here. Okay, the first printing of 7,500 copies sold out in 1 month. 1 month. Readers appreciated the beauty of Douglas's descriptions and her explanations of how the local people were connected to this special place. The River of Grass wasn't just nourishing the plants and animals, it also provided the people with water. If the Everglades were drained, then water wouldn't flow to the aquifers underneath the sawgrass. Southern Florida would become a semi-tropical desert. So let's stop right there and think about what we read yesterday about ecosystems. Okay, so we know that one little change in an ecosystem can ruin the whole thing. So it's really important to make connections to our writing as we go along. So we learned yesterday that in ecosystems, if one little thing is changed, or maybe humans start taking over that land, it can ruin the whole ecosystem. That's the same thing that Marjory Stoneman Douglas realized as she was, writing this book, and how passionate she was about the Everglades. So 1 month after the book was published, Douglas attended a ceremony on the edge of the Everglades. President Truman set aside about 1.5 million acres, or 1/3 of the Everglades, as a national park. So that's huge, because of her writing, part of this was being set aside and became a national park, which meant no one could ever destroy it. Unlike the Grand Canyon and Yellowstone, the Everglades didn't have spectacular features. However, the area did have defenders such as Marjory Stoneman Douglas, who helped show the people why they needed to protect this unique place. Despite the success of her book and the existence of the national park, Douglas didn't stop working. She wrote other nonfiction books about Florida, including 2 for younger readers, Freedom River and Alligator Crossing. She was often asked to speak about her most famous book, while some parts of the Everglades were protected and the rest were still being threatened. The owners of sugar plantations wanted to control the water so they could have more sugarcane. The Army Corps of Engineers dug canals to drain the water away from the sawgrass marshes. Developers wanted more dry land to build housing for Miami's growing population. In 1969, developers planned to build an airport in the Everglades. Joe Browder, the former TV reporter and environmentalist, asked Douglas to help him stop the proposed 6-runway airport. She started an organization called Friends of the Everglades. Douglas spoke out against the airport project to anyone who would listen, and even those who wouldn't listen. Her reputation as a protector of the Everglades forced people to pay attention. However, the water in the Everglades remained a problem. Douglas said that something had to be done to restore the Everglades. She pushed to make polluters clean up the water and get rid of the canals that diverted the water from the area. Years passed, Douglas got older, but she never lost her fighting spirit. She spoke out in the early 1980s when developers threatened the Everglades once again. By then, she was in her 90s, and her vision was poor, but she was still a force to be reckoned with. Sam Poole, executive director of the South Florida Water Management District, said, "She just stood her ground. That was a very hostile crowd. She was very diminutive, but cast a giant shadow over the Everglades. One small person can make a difference. She made a huge difference." Douglas received many awards, including the Medal of Freedom. The citation said her work enhanced our nation's respect for our precious environment by reminding all of us of nature's delicate balance. The Everglades Forever Act was passed by the Florida legislature in 1994. Its purpose was to preserve and restore the quality needed by plants and animals in the Everglades. Douglas understood that laws weren't enough to protect the Everglades. The support of people was also needed. 21 years after founding the Friends of the Everglades, she worked with the young Friends of the Everglades. "Take the children out to the glades and let them learn," Douglas declared. "Education will be the only way to save the glades. Tell them the Everglades isn't saved yet. The children are our future, and we can't do without that." In 1997, 1.3 million acres of the Everglades were officially named Marjory Stoneman Douglas Wilderness. The next year, at age 108, Douglas died, and her books and life still inspire anyone who wants to make a difference in the world. Okay, so notice how this was a long text, right? And we went through and highlighted the things that we thought were important, right? So as if I were doing my YouTube part where I'm typing in what I was reading in the text, I'm going to make sure that I am including the details that I think are the most important. Hold on, let me check okay. Imhoff, I am not positive about that, so give me 1 second, okay? Okay, so, Bosco, hold on, I'm reading yours. "If we write in the text box, we have to delete the tab and go right back." I'm not sure what you're meaning, Bosco. Okay, so as I'm reading, I'm picking out that information that I think is the most important, okay? So I would go back to my text box or my UDO page, just like this, except for I have it in a different place so that you can see it. Okay, so let's pretend that this is my box from what I read, and I typed out all of the things that I highlighted as I was reading, okay? So as I'm going through, all of these details are important, but we're looking for the most important details. What did we really take away from this article? So I highlighted those in yellow, that Douglas met Hervey Allen and she asked about writing a book about the Everglades, and then he agreed to publish it. And then 1 month after her book was published, President Truman set aside 1.5 million acres of the Everglades as a national park. And then in 1997, 1.3 million acres of the Everglades were officially named the Marjory Stoneman Douglas Wilderness. So those are my biggest takeaways from this text. Now, does anyone have any questions or concerns about how I got that? How did I find those? Anyone have any questions or concerns?
Okay, did somebody eat his potatoes?
Does someone want to explain to me why these three are the most important? Anyone?
No.
Because
No?
Because they're about her history.
Yes, they're about her history. Cameron, why would you say that these are the most important?
Oh, I think I know.
Okay, go ahead.
Because, what is it? Douglas was asking Hervey Allen to publish the book.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that if she would not have published the book that the Everglades would have gotten the attention that it did?
Mm-mm.
Right, so probably not. So if she wouldn't have published this book, then it wouldn't have gotten it wouldn't have gotten all the attention that it did. So as you're reading this next article, I'm not going to read it to you because I don't. Hold on, let me go through and mute some people. Go ahead and mute yourself if you can, so that I don't hear backgrounds. So as I'm reading the text, I'm going to make sure that I'm finding important information, but then at the end, I want to find the most important information. So what you are going to do is you are going to read the next text on your own, and that text is the Rachel Carson text. And as you are reading the text, I want you to find those most important details, okay? Let me see how much time we've had.
Turn it down.
Okay, so as we're reading the Rachel Carson text, I want you on your own copy of it, like when you're looking at the text on your Google Classroom, I want you to pick out those most important details. So I'll read it out to you, and then you are going to find those most important details. All right, here we go. Inventors and scientists Rachel Carson. Activist and author Rachel Carson, whose book Silent Spring led to the study of pesticides, testifies before Senate Government Operations Subcommittee in Washington, D.C. on June 4th, 1963. Carson urged Congress to curb the sale of chemical pesticides and aerial spraying. Okay, so at first it starts with a synopsis, and that's kind of just an overview of the whole text. So it's super important that you always read that, because that will give you the main idea and maybe even some of the most important information. So Rachel Carson was a famous marine biologist, author, and environmentalist. She is best known for writing Silent Spring. The book started the environmental movement and made people aware that humans have an effect on the environment. Early life. In 1907, Rachel Carson was born in a small Pennsylvania community. She spent a great deal of time exploring the forest and streams. As a young child, Carson felt strongly about nature and writing. When she was 10 years old, she published her first story in the children's magazine. So that's a little bit different than Marjory Stoneman Douglas. Top left. In 1925, Carson started at Pennsylvania College for Women. She was determined to become a writer. Halfway through, she switched to biology, the study of living things. Carson was given a scholarship to do graduate work in biology at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. It was an enormous accomplishment for a woman in 1929, joining the U.S. Fisheries Bureau. Carson had a talent for both writing and biology. In 1935, it won her a job with the U.S. Bureau of Fisheries, the part of the government that protects fish and where they live. Meanwhile, she continued to write articles on conservation and nature for newspapers and magazines. From the very beginning, she said it was important to think about the well-being of the fish as well as that of the fishermen. In 1936, Carson was one of only 2 women working at the Bureau as a professional. The rest were secretaries. The government department was later renamed the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. She visited the Chesapeake Bay area of Maryland and Virginia, where she spoke with fishermen and visited factories and conservation centers. During World War II, Carson took part in the program to research undersea sounds. It helped with the Navy develop ways to find submarines. Carson published her first book, Under the Sea Wind, in 1941. She wrote about science and the sea in a clear and beautiful way. She read it and became interested in the natural world. Okay, so I want you to just pause really quick, and I want you to chat me what you think are the most important details so far quickly, or write it in your thing. And don't chat me unless you're talking about school. All right, so far we know that Rachel Carson went to college and received a scholarship to do graduate work at Johns Hopkins, which was a huge deal. So that's probably super important. We also know that she worked a job at the U.S. Bureau of Fisheries, and she was one of the 2 women that worked there as a professional rather than a secretary. So I definitely think those are 2 important details. Starting at the top right, Silent Spring. In 1952, she left her job to write. In 1962, her 4th and last book, Silent Spring, was published about the danger caused by harmful chemicals called pesticides. Farmers use pesticides to kill bugs that destroy crops. Carson became interested in pesticides when she was at the Fish and Wildlife Service. She became even more worried when a new one called DDT came out in 1945. Carson read scientific studies that said it harmed creatures in the water. The consequences of Silent Spring. Okay, guys, you've got to stop unmuting yourselves, okay? All right. In Silent Spring, Carson said that the farmers were using too many pesticides. She also said that they are contaminating the environment and slowly poisoning living things. Carson knew most people did not know this and would be very surprised. She also knew that many people in the chemical and agricultural business would get angry. Carson knew that they would attack her and say that her book was fake, but this did not stop her. She wanted to let the public know the facts about pesticides, and she hoped it would lead to stronger environmental laws. Carson had no idea just how popular and influential her book would become. Carson was right about her critics, though. They spent hundreds of thousands of dollars attacking her and trying to prove that she was wrong. Carson's book changed many people's ideas about the environment. People wrote to their lawmakers and asked them to do something about pesticides. Lawmakers asked Carson to speak to them about pesticides. Carson said that the government should reduce the use of pesticides and ban the worst ones. The government Science Advisory Committee agreed with Carson. In 1964, Congress said that companies had to prove that a product was safe before they could sell it. In 1972, the government banned DDT. In 1970, the Environmental Protection Agency was created in response to the growing public demand for cleaner water, air, and land. Later, life and death. Carson died of cancer in 1964 when she was just 57 years old. In 1969, the Fish and Wildlife Service named one of its refuges in Maine to remember this amazing woman. It is called the Rachel Carson National Wildlife Refuge. Okay, so that is our last text. So I want you guys to tell me what you think was the most important part in that text. What can we take away from that? That would be the most important part.
I'm doing this.
Let's see. I'm gonna call on people. Who is I hate quarantine? Is that Kevin? Kevin, what would you say is the most important part of that text? What did we learn about Rachel Carson?
I can't hear.
I'm Abner too. Yeah.
Okay, well, tell me what was the most important part of that text.
I did.
That people started writing stories about like what I don't even know how that word is.
Quarantine.
No.
About Rachel Carson. What was the most important part about Rachel Carson?
They banned DDT or DBT or something like that.
But what was DDT considered? It was considered a pest.
Pesticide company.
MS.
Okay, so what's the connection between these two scientists, between Marjory Stoneman Douglas and Rachel Carson? What do they have in common?
They both wanted
Hold on.
both determined to become something in life.
Okay, they wanted to become something in life. That's great. What else?
They tried to help the world.
Okay, they tried to help the world. Great. What else?
I have no idea.
What else do they have in common? They were both scientists. They both wanted to help the world. And what were they trying to help in? Were they helping in a hospital?
No.
Were they helping in a school?
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe, but where were they really, really helping?
In
What did we read about yesterday?
nature.
About ecosystems, right? Their passion was to help in an ecosystem. So we're going to take what we learned from yesterday and then the two articles today. And in your UDO, you're going to, in that center column, you're going to write the similarities between them, okay? And then at the bottom, you're going to write a statement paragraph, okay, about comparing the two texts. So I'm going to pull up for you guys the sentence frames that I have. Let me share my screen.
What happens if we don't do this?
Then I'm going to tell your parents.
It's a great. Uh-oh.
All right, can y'all see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So do you see my sentence starters? In the text, Marjory Douglas and Rachel Carson, there are many similarities. In the text, Marjory Douglas, we learned that blank. In the text, Rachel Carson, we learned that blank. These two texts are similar because blank, and these two texts are different because blank. So can someone, without typing it, I just want you to tell me what you would say using these sentence frames. How would you make this statement?
Thinking. About nothing.
Guys, it's right in front of you.
Text.
Look at your screen. So what did we learn in the Marjory Douglas text?
There are many similarities.
Okay, but what was Marjory Douglas focusing on?
Ecosystem. Become a writer.
The ecosystems and becoming a writer and protecting the what?
Environment.
The environment, and more specifically, the Everglades, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so we learned that she wanted to protect the environment and save the Everglades. In the text Rachel Carson, we learned what?
That she wanted to like go against the pesticide company.
Good. She wanted to protect the land from pesticides so that we would have cleaner water, land, and air. Okay, these two texts are similar because, why are these texts similar?
Because they're both trying to like do something in life that will help the environment in all.
Awesome.
They're both trying to help the ecosystem.
Yep. Good job, Brianna. These two texts are different because
they both have different names.
well, yes.
One is a writer and one is helping in the military, I think.
She did help with the Navy a little bit, but she was mainly a biologist, right? Which is the study of living things. But she did help the Navy at one point.
One was trying to be a writer, and the other one was trying to. Yeah, I forgot.
Think about their goals. Were their goals of what they wanted to protect the same?
Kind of.
A little bit, right? But Rachel Carson was more focused on pesticides, right?
Yeah, and then on ecosystems.
And then Marjorie Douglas was more focused on the Everglades. Good. Okay, so do you guys see how instead of getting overwhelmed by how much information is in front of me, how I'm kind of breaking it down piece by piece? Hold on, let me unmute you. Does that make sense, Cameron? I see you kind of, are you shaking your head or are you just moving?
Shaking my head.
Shaking your head, okay.
About that.
What'd you say?
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else have any questions? Brianna, I know you joined a little bit later, but I'm going to make this video into a YouTube so that you can watch the beginning of the reading of the first text. That sound good? Okay.
Smart.
Brianna, this is M. Hoff. If you have any questions, Mom has my number. Okay, I got to go to Ms. Yang's meeting now.
Okay.
All right. Talk to you later.
Bye, Ms. Imhoff.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Guys, don't leave yet. What, Kiera?
Hi.
Hi. Can everyone turn on their video? I want to see your faces.
No.
Please.
I hate peer puberty.
I still hate quarantine. Who's that still hate quarantine?
Evan.
Not me. No.
So that's how you turn on the camera.
Abner, are you sitting outside?
Yes.
Yes. What, Cam?
I don't want to.
Turn on your videos.
I'm at my new house.
Miss Morton,
Yeah?
when I was watching your fish and tree video, I went to YouTube and I saw that you made a song video like cool.
Of what?
I saw you made like a song with your class.
Oh,
Yeah.
like class movie, like something 2019.
You turned a popular song into a school song.
I did.
I'm at my new house.
Everyone smile.
I saw.
Hold on. 1, 2, 3. Oh, I miss you guys.
Miss you too.
What has everyone been doing?
Why is quarantine still a thing?
I don't know.
I was doing some football practice at my cousin's house. We're down the street.
Hi, Brianna.
I'm signed up.
And then he said he quit, but then he started playing again.
You were playing what?
I was playing Roblox with Abner. He said he quit Roblox, but then the next time I played, he just started.